Hello, everybody. My name is Jeff Pedley. I'm an English teacher at the European School of Brussels 2. And today I'd like to present to you a video about relationships in Educating Rita. This is the set text for the European BAC 25-26 if you are in S7. If you're in S6, you'll also be studying it this year. And you also will have an option to choose it for the 26-27 BAC if you are in S7 that year as well. I really like this play, and I'm looking forward to sharing with you my thoughts and helping you just get on top of your revision with it, really. So anyway, without further ado, let's make a start. There are five key things that I'm going to look at with you throughout this video. Firstly, a little bit of context, a little bit about the author's background. I really like Willy Russell. I've taught him for many years, and I really like teaching him and reading his things, seeing his plays. Secondly, we're going to look a little bit at the play structure and focus on the summary of the two acts. Then the main part of this video is going to concentrate on 6 key relationships that occur within this play. To help you also, we're going to look at 5 key symbols, which will really help you retrieve quotes and be able to give some textual reference in the exams. And finally, we're just going to kind of explain the ending. But anyway, let's go. So, yeah, as I've said, the text this year is a text called Educating Rita by the Liverpudlian writer Willy Russell. Yeah, lots of people know it as a movie, etc. Maybe you'll speak to parents, or especially in the UK, they will really know the movie about this. No doubt, really successful. But again, the play also very successful. Anyway, I'm going to share with you a brief biography of Willy Russell. So here he is. You can see him there. What lovely head of hair he's got there in front of. This is him with a picture of Julie Walters in front of. I'll say that again. In the front of house, a publicity shot with a photo of Julie Walters. Julie Walters was the actress who originally played Rita on stage and ended up becoming very famous herself in movies afterwards. And this picture's taken from Willy Russell's website himself. Anyway, there he is again. Handsome young man, born 23rd of August 1947 in Wiston, near Liverpool in the UK. Needless to say, Liverpool is a centre of culture, music, poetry, sport, it's theatre, it's got it all really. And really passionate, really loving, city. And my brother lives there and has worked a lot of time there. I absolutely adore Liverpool. But anyway, he was raised in a working class family. He left school at 15 years old, and he initially worked as a women's hairdresser and performed as a singer songwriter in folk clubs. Of course, it's quite obvious maybe to see at this stage, you will see a lot of Rita's background, echoed in his own history here. He returned to education in his early 20s and qualified as a teacher. You could argue you can see Frank and Rita in him here. And he began writing drama while training and teaching. His early work included one-act plays at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival in the early 70s. The Fringe Festival is a really popular comedy festival in Scotland. If you ever get the chance to go, it is amazing. And his breakthrough came in 1974. Just very quickly, where was he born? 47 he was born, and 74 was his first success. A musical about the Beatles called John, Paul, George and Ringo. And his major plays, as we know, Educating Rita, and he also had some other major plays. Blood Brothers is an amazing play if you ever get the chance to see it as well. Studied a lot in the UK, was performed in Brussels not so long ago, actually. And, he looks at themes of class, education, transformation, identity, and aspiration emerging from his own background. He is still influential. His works are produced internationally. We're studying this here in Brussels and across the European school system, and these archives are held at Liverpool John Moores University. Just a couple of quotes I'd like to share about him as well, which help us understand this play, really. So this is from the Times Literary Supplement. It's just a bit of a commentary on his contribution to British theatre. And it goes, Russell understands the tension between wanting to belong and wanting to become something more. His plays articulate this conflict better than almost any other or any British dramatist of his generation. And secondly, Willy Russell has the extraordinary ability to dramatise the struggles of self-education and self-discovery. His plays remain some of the most insightful examinations of what it means to change your life. And without giving too much away, of course, I hope you've read the play, seen the play already, but this kind of some metafiction going on here, just as Rita is transformed by Frank's teaching and sees a way out of her, her societal entrapment. Many students read Russell, Blood Brothers, Our Day Out, Educating Rita, and for lots of them, it's their first taste of literature, the first time they're engaged in literature, and it's so interesting that for a lot of students, Russell's plays are that bridge which gets them engaged in literature, or gets them engaged in education, and gives them way out. He should be so proud of himself of what he's managed to achieve. And you can see a few of his plays on display here. Please note that he's multi-talented. He just plays. Our Day Out was originally what was a play, but was performed, on the BBC in 1977, and then kind of tweaked afterwards. Educating Rita, as we say, 1980 was a play, but then became a film just 2 or 3 years after. And so, and Blood Brothers is a musical, so he's multi-talented. Some students who, when I've taught Blood Brothers, have been lucky enough to hear me sing. Anyway, without further ado, let's make a start. So yes, before just a quick little bit of context about Educating Rita. So it's been transformed into over 30 languages. It's performed in theatres all around the world, and it's massively commercially successful. It's one of the best-selling modern British plays, and it's generated continuous revenue since 1980 from stage rights, amateur productions, educational licenses, and it's frequently listed among the most performed GCSE and A-level text in UK schools. Interestingly, as I've said before, the film comes out 3 years after this first performance on the stage, using the same actress who played Rita on the stage and then in the film, and it won 3 Oscar nominations, multiple BAFTAs, which is like the British Film Awards, and then it continues even to this day to appear on the lists of the top 100 British films. I'm sure teachers all within the European system have been playing this film afterwards as well. And then and the play itself has been in print continuously for over 40 years now. Needless to say, it's a core text in the British and International Exam Boards. Why we're studying it. Okay, so let's get on to the analysis. First things first, its structure. It is a 2-act play. And, it has that small break in between as well. The big turning point in that gap. But anyway, Act 1 focuses on Rita's arrival, the early transformation, and then the tension with the old life. And again, that's when she goes to the summer school in that middle part. When she returns, it focuses on Rita's independence, the reversal of roles, and then kind of a fragmentation and resolution. It's a very compressed play in a very compressed setting. The entire play is set in Frank's office. It's a single room drama. It emphasizes the dialogue and the psychological change. Interestingly, when we look at the symbols later on, it's a lot of it are just objects that are found within that office. And this creates intimacy, confinement, and a real focus on character development. It's worth saying as well at this early stage, of course, this is just a 2-person play. Now, as much as that, again, allows us to focus on the intimacy and the character development of our two main characters, don't forget, it doesn't give anybody else a voice. Please, if you've watched the film and you haven't, focused on the play, remember, we don't meet Trish, we don't meet Denny, we don't meet Tiger, any of these characters in the play. All of their character development comes through Rita or Frank, and that's quite interesting. Maybe a little point early maybe a high level point to make early there, that the other characters don't have a voice. We don't ever get to see their side of the story. There's some debate over how long the time frame is of this play, but people generally acknowledge that it spans over one academic year. Although again, not that it's not that every scene is a weekly session, counting in. You'll notice that she gets set homework assignments in between them, and an action has passed between each scene sometimes. And it's got a clear structural purpose as well. The first act focusing on that aspiration and dependency, for Rita, of course, and then it flips in that second act to autonomy. You've got conflict, that role reversal, and basically the structure mirrors Rita's internal journey there, from like an imitative learner to an independent thinker. Hope if I can put my teeth in right. Anyway, and just to help you kind of get your head around the summary, I'm a big fan of images, and images for revision, of course. It's a very simple thing to say, but a really important thing. And like, if you just look through the play here and you just see door handle, wedding ring, radio, put it on the radio, the books burning, Shakespeare, the pub, and then the bin, already, it helps you start to frame in your mind the progression of this storyline. I don't want to go into lots of detail here. You can see this PDF underneath in the comments section, and you can use it for your own revision there. There's loads of summaries on the internet, but putting it very simply, the first scene, it's Rita's arrival. She's got the stuck door, messing around with the door handle, the discussion of assonance, ruby fruit jungle, and then the refusal from Frank, and then the assistance of Rita. I've only just noticed this now, but that's a very clear role reversal from the final scene, isn't it? Look at that. Frank refusing, Rita insisting. What do we have at the end? Frank insisting, Rita refusing. It's a very clear mirror image, isn't it, at that end? But anyway, from the first scene. Scene 2, Frank trying to resist his drinks. You've got this focus on Howard's End, and Rita really struggling here, starting to learn about Frank's marriage. The third scene is when Rita is late. They all do it on the radio essay, and then there's a really nice monologue that she does in there about having no culture, etc. And then and Frank, maybe the first signs that she's got some really good literary analysis there with Frank, where she's starting to connect things. Scene 4, you've got the missing essay, the books burnt, the refusal to quit, the course gives me life, and the Chekhov situation. Scene 5, when Rita bursts in because she's seen Macbeth, and she's just so passionate and so just wanting to shout out at Lady Macbeth, etc. Frank is taken aback by this and feels a really close connection. Maybe I'd argue that this is where they are the closest, and he invites her around to his house there, and Rita has the panic of what to wear. In between scene 5 and scene 6, you can see I've put a pub sign there, but that's where Rita doesn't turn up at the dinner party. Denny fights again, and it's that pub scene where she describes the mother crying, and basically it gives her the main reason. We learn the main reason why she's so persistent in her learning. And then scene 7, pardon me, Rita kicked out of a home, he's found the pills, etc. And then we've got the Macbeth essay. Not a very successful essay, thrown in the bin, start again, let's get on with it. And she's insisting on the transformation. Between Act 1 and Act 2, she goes away to summer school, and then that's where the transformation has occurred. Some of my students argued that, that's where it's kind of omitted where they pass each other, where she becomes less dependent on him. It's not seen. A lot of Shakespeare omits a lot of key conflicts, doesn't he? But anyway, when she comes back, she's transformed. She's got this summer school joy. Frank wants to teach her about Blake. She's already heard about it. I've put a symbol there as a pen because that's what he gives her what she gives him as a gift. Scene 2, I don't know if you can see that image there, but it's like a head and a voice. But yeah, that's when she comes in with a different voice, this kind of received pronunciation, and she's talking about Tiger. Frank has got quite a lot of jealousy in this scene, and I think that's the trigger that then when we see scene 3, the alcohol bottles, that's when Frank's really drunk. The students are complaining about him. He's getting threatened to get sent to Australia, and you know what I mean. There's Rita starting to become really independent. Scene 4, she's late again. She's left the hairdressing. She's got the bistro life now. Frank's really bitter, and this is kind of his last throw of his dice in terms of his romantic expressions, I guess. He almost froze his poetry. This is your homework. Real insecurity, lays all his cards on the table in that scene. Scene 5, Rita praises his poems, but we've got this, Frank's self-loathing that comes out. He rejects his own work. The poems get ripped up, and there's kind of a really big argument in this scene, a big identity clash inside Rita's head, and then the name debate. He's shouting out on the way out, what do I call you now, Susan, Virginia, Jane, etc. Scene 5, the shortest scene in the play, where Frank is really drunk and he's making a phone call to trying to find Rita, really, just to say that she's had the exam entry put in. He manages to speak with Trish, and then finally the last scene where Rita turns up. Frank's packing for Australia. She's passed the exam. It was the question that she did before. We learn about Trish's, suicide attempt, this idea that the academic life is not so idealistic, and then it's a big facade. And then we've got, Rita choosing herself. And if I could put one word to summarize that final scene, it's choice. Rita is free. She's got a choice. She kind of recoils a little bit. She doesn't, she rejects. She's not as idealistic about the culture that she's gone into. She rejects Tiger's personality. She talks about Trish's suicide. And, she even suggests she might even have a kid at this stage. Maybe I will, maybe I won't. But what Russell highlights in that final scene is that she has choice. She can go to France. She can have a baby. She could continue studying, do whatever. She could go to Australia with Frank. She could do whatever she wants. And that's what I think the ultimate message there is in the end, isn't it? That education, for Rita anyway, gives her freedom, and Rita offers Frank a haircut at the end there. And we'll look at the ending anyway in more detail later on. Okay. The main focus of this video then is going to be on 6 key relationships. Rita and Frank, Rita and Denny, Rita and her family / community, Rita and Trish. And then the last 2, I mean, it really depends on the exam question that you get, because, it might be wise, to study and make sure you've got some ammunition to talk about her own internal relationship, and her self-formation. And then finally, we're going to look at the only non-human relationship here, but the relationship between Rita and education. For my interview in the European schools, relationships was the theme a few years ago, 5-6 years ago. And I was put on the spot, and I wasn't trying to be flippant. And the interviewer said, the director or whoever answered the question said, uh, you know, relationships is the theme of this year. Can you think of a text which would be appropriate or which include relationships? And I wasn't trying to be cheeky or rude, but I said I can't think of a text that don't, or sorry, I can't think of a text that doesn't involve relationships. And again, even even the the idea of internal relationships. But here, even though we've only got two characters in the play, we've really got six strong relationships that go on. Please don't over focus on the Rita and Frank. Of course, it is a key relationship, and there's so much to talk about and so much to go through. But you might get a question that just leans more towards social expectations or external identity. Questions of identity. I'm a sociology teacher as well, and our identity is formed externally. It's the labels that people give to us. If we were in the forest by ourselves, our identity quickly disappears in a lot of ways. So, maybe the family and the community and how Denny labels her as well is really, really important. Of course, depends on the question, but again, these suggestions will give you loads of ideas. So anyway, I'm going to go through each one. Just going to briefly talk about each bullet point, literally a few seconds. Again, you can see this afterwards or so, and I'll give you a key quote at the end of every relationship. But anyway, if you're taking notes, then there you go at the top. Rita and Frank, number one. I think a transformational but uneven and intellectual bond. I think that's the symbol of this relationship. It starts as it is a tutor-student dynamic, but a really interesting one. The boundaries are crossed quite a few times. And Frank begins as a quite an authoritative tutor, and as Rita as the eager student. The relationship is reciprocal. In other words, they both get something off they both receive something off each other at the start. Rita revitalizes, really nice verb choice there, isn't it? Revitalizes Frank's stagnant intellectual life. Frank provides structure and guidance to Rita's early development. And remember, if I'm going through too quickly of these, the PDF is underneath in the comments box. Sorry. Just very briefly as well on that first point, a question that I ask my students a lot with this, and by the way, when we're looking at these general reflections at the end, that's what needs to be in your conclusion of the essay. So many students write the same thing in the introduction as they do in the conclusion. That's not what an essay should be. I know you may be summarizing some of your main points, but ultimately, why do we study literature? It teaches us something about life. It leaves us with a strong impact at the end that I come away, be it from your essay, be it from your play, and I think about life differently. And maybe, of course, I can't tell you exactly what to write in that conclusion. It's not science where we have a neat answer, but I think a really strong point from this play is that the teacher learns more, or does the teacher learn more from the student in this situation? And does the teacher change the student, or does the student change the teacher? Maybe a powerful ending there, in the conclusion. But anyway, another nice verb there as well of eroding. Frank's authority erodes as Rita grows. As Rita becomes more confident and culturally fluent, a really nice term there as well, Frank's dominance weakens. His academic authority is challenged by her fresh perspective and by his own declining self-belief. A lot of my students use over and over again this term of a disillusioned academic. Please don't all use that term, but that's what he is. He's so disillusioned. He's stagnant, as you see in that first one. There in that first slide that I said, he's got a stagnant intellectual life. Rita is that breath of fresh air. She literally bursts into his office full of energy. Breaks down that door. We'll look at the symbolism of that later. Rita gains cultural and linguistic confidence. it's not only a transformation in a visual sense, but also in knowledge. Her speech, her tone, her vocabulary, her interpretive control, her analysis, her literary analysis is what transforms as well. And this linguistic confidence allows her to occupy spaces that she once found impenetrable. Again, I'm going on to it early, but the door is almost locked to her at the start. She has to force her way in, just like the academic world is locked to her. She's this. If it wasn't relationships as a main theme, it's entrapment. Our characters are trapped. Rita is trapped in her life, and she's got to, smash down these walls, throw open this door. She has to learn the speech, tone, vocabulary, literary, or she thinks anyway, has to learn these things to break down these walls. Moving on, this on Frank's side, there becomes an emotional dependence. Is it romance? Is it lust? Is it love? Is it lust? Is it intellectual intimacy? I don't know. That's completely up to you to follow, to argue. There are some people who believe that this is a romance play. There are some people who believe that this play is just completely about sex and completely about Frank's sexual desires. It's completely up to you how you want to explore it. But remember, and that's what we do in English literature. It's a bit different from a French or a Latin style. Where we really want you to explore what you get out of this play and what you understand by this play. So, Frank begins to rely. Really nice, very simple word, good one to get in your essay. Reliance, begins to rely on Rita emotionally. She fills a void left by his failing personal life and his professional disillusionment. That word again. His dependence signals the asymmetry in their evolving relationship. The role reversal, etc. Moving on, the relationship defines but cannot contain her change. I'm just going to say that again because it's the sentence is worded a little bit interestingly. But yeah, so the relationship defines but cannot contain her change. Put my teeth back in. Although Frank is central to Rita's intellectual awakening, another good phrase, she wakes him up academically, her growing independence ultimately moves her beyond him. The relationship cannot hold once she becomes self-sufficient. We'll look at the ending later on, but if I was to summarize what happens at the end of this play, how Rita and Frank are left, it's a transformative relationship, but it's not permanent. This is not a Hollywood Disney movie or whatever, where we've got a nice happy ending. They run away to Australia together and get married. It's it's life. It's real life. Some people come into our lives and they change us for the better or for the worse, but it's not always permanent. And I think that's, ultimately what happens here. And it's been repeated a few times now, but, there's a clear role reversal at the end. By Act 2, Rita no longer waits, no longer wants Frank's approval. She chooses her own text, constructs her own interpretations, and forms her own intellectual networks. The reversal highlights the transformative power of education. Again, we will nuance this later on because I think there's, some limitations or some to this idealistic vision of education, but anyway, or literature in particular. I've chosen two key quotes here. There are hundreds of key quotes you can use for Rita and Frank, but I like these two because they show a very circular narrative here. We've got from the second scene and the end scene with the haircut. Frank says at the start, when he's kind of besotted with her, when he's kind of infatuated, almost falling emotionally for her. Oh, Rita, why didn't you walk in here 20 years ago? He still would have been, I don't know, 20, 30 years old, maybe even 40 years old. So, but, 30, 40 years old. But anyway, no age is given, of course. But it does suggest a romantic or definitely a lustful attraction to Rita. Look at the next thing that I wrote there. That he has, or there is, unrequited feelings. Unrequited means not returned. it's unrequited love. He, again, or you maybe just think it's lust or attraction, unrequited attraction, but you know what I mean? He gives it to her, but she doesn't give it back. She just sees him as a teacher, as a gatekeeper for her studies. And then at the end, I'm going to take 10 years off you. It's interesting here, that he's looking at being made young, I don't know, in a sexual sense or so, and then she's visually taken the years off him after everything he's done for her, that visual transformation, aesthetic transformation. Rita is preparing to cut Frank hair. It ends on a touching and humorous note, and it recalls that first meeting as well. That's what she says. Anyway, relationship 2, Rita and Denny, a really interesting one, and it's quite obvious, I think, I'm sure why I've put this second. So he's a symbol of resistance, stability, and fear of transformation. I think if you're making notes, I think those are that's the kind of subtitle, isn't it, for the Rita and Denny relationship. Denny values the old Rita. His love is anchored in the comfort of the familiar. He cherishes Rita as she was, lively but compliant, part of the same social and emotional landscape as him. And again, I've made this point earlier, I'll make it again. He is not given a voice in this play. He is in a film, he is not given a voice in this play. So anything we hear about Rita and Denny's relationship is only through the mouth of Rita. Maybe an interesting point, or maybe a useful point, depending on the question you get in the exam. And again, it's really moving into that high level if you start to look at the analysis of how it's been presented, especially at L2 level. Secondly, his stability, or their relationship stability, is threatened by her growth. Rita's pursuit of education destabilizes their relationship because it disrupts the routines that give Denny's life meaning. Change feels like a threat to everything he relies on. We don't know if he's a violent, aggressive person before Rita goes to Frank, or starts seeing Frank. However, Rita is very confident, is very, very outspoken, very lively. I very much doubt that, that she's a pushover in this relationship. However, look at what he becomes when when Rita starts to develop herself, burning the books, etc., being incredibly violent, having arguments all the time. Well, not violent, but having arguments, physical all the time. He destroys the books, which is a very symbolic rejection, isn't it? Burning Rita's books is not simply anger, it's a symbolic violence against the world she's entering. He's not touching her, he's destroying what matters the most to her way out, her key to unlock the academic world, to access the academic world. The act exposes potentially the fear of being left behind. Not completely convinced behind that. I put it in earlier, but I'm not too sure. The act exposes the fear. Is the evidence for that? I'll leave that up to you to decide. And is it an inability to understand her ambitions? In class, I explained, that books are a symbol of escapism. There's a lot of escapism going on in this play. Think of Frank's alcoholism. The play itself is the play itself is escapism. Us sat watching the play, again, that metafiction is escapism. But simply, by Denny burning the books, it's when the books represent Rita's way out, it's Rita's opportunity to escape, both literary and educationally. He is basically cutting off her escape. He is not allowing her to escape the world and that's what burning those books symbolizes to me anyway. And then moving on, the love is tied to conformity, not autonomy. His love is conditional. He supports Rita insofar. Notice that you say that word, that's one of the very few words in English where you can put together 3 words can be squashed together to make one word, and it's completely correct grammatically there. So he supports Rita only insofar as, to the limits of that she remains with the life that he expects. Her independence breaks the unspoken contract that the relationship is built on sameness. And you're getting bored of me saying this now, but Denny doesn't have a voice. This is only what we hear through Rita. But I guess if he's burning her books, if there's any truth to that, then of course you've got to appreciate that point. He represents pressure to remain within class norms. He embodies broader social forces that discourage upward mobility. His reflection reflects collective anxieties about betrayal, abandonment, and the reshaping of identity. We have talked a lot in class about, relationships, and some of us have been reflecting personally, when you connect with someone at the start of a relationship, to what extent do you allow them to change from the person that they were at the start? And that's a sign of a really strong relationship, I think, in my personal opinion. If people are given room to develop and change, change the color of their hair, change their habits, change their passions, change their job, whatever, it's a sign of a strong relationship. If you allow that, if you can still be solid in a relationship and you allow that freedom at the same time for people, again, it's entrapment and freedom, isn't it? And, and Denny doesn't allow Rita that, it seems. And, reflect yourself on relationships that you have. To what extent do the relationships stay strong if that person changes so much? How often do we hear about relationships where they say we grew apart? What does that actually mean? We grew apart. Probably that they took on different interests. They took a different career path. They started getting different friends. They started changing their interests that are different from yours. That's how sometimes relationships end, which is exactly here. Denny could be saying we grew apart. And then finally, this emotional cost of mobility made visible. Rita's journey is not a simple rise. It is marked by loss. I think one of my students in class said, Rita, every time Rita gains something, and a student didn't say this actually, but I'm kind of paraphrasing roughly what they said or what we said. But, as Rita's life improves and she gains things, every relationship that she's involved with deteriorates and people lose things. Look what Frank loses. Look what her family lose. Look what Denny loses. The only one that's kind of a bit away from this trend is maybe Trish. And then, so it's not a simple rise. It's marked by loss. Denny's hurt and the breakup notice that hurt used as a noun there. Denny's hurt and their breakup show the emotional price of transcending one's class environment. To what extent do you focus on yourself at the detriment of others? And this is, I think, the key quote really for Rita and Denny, where Rita says in the 4th scene, I know what he's thinking. He's wondering where that girl he married has gone to. She appreciates that her marriage is in trouble, and yet her desire to rise above the circumstances, are basically the focus. But anyway, number 3, third relationship, Rita and her family and the community. Again, a really important relationship in this entire play. Subtitle I've got here, belonging, ritual, and the pain of departure. I don't know if you can zoom in. I don't know if you can see that image there, but it's the pub scene as it's presented in the film. So there's strong communal bonds. Rita's family is defined by togetherness, humour, and predictable rhythms. Their closeness often brings comfort and belonging. You've got this pub culture, not simply a location, but a ritualistic space, where shared identity is reinforced through song, through drink, through repetition. Notice there's another key quote from Denny. I can't remember it exactly, but it's along the lines of Denny thinks he has a choice because he gets to choose the 6 different lagers at the local pub. He doesn't have a choice. He's trapped. But that pub culture there is really what's highlighted. Maybe those of you going for the highest grades here, this symbol of alcohol, as much as it brings these people together in the pub culture, it's Frank is isolated with his alcohol. He's hiding his alcoholism, behind the books, etc. Is that symbolic? Hiding it behind his academic career? I don't know, or his academic facade, his professional facade. I don't know, but yeah, he does want to keep going to the pub. But interestingly, I'm not sure he's getting the same out of it that Rita's family are getting out of it. Anyway, Rita's ambitions disrupt the group cohesion. Her desire for education introduces tension. It challenges the implicit agreement that everyone stays the same and follows the same path. The family cannot understand her change. Her transformation appears as a rejection to her family. They lack the conceptual framework to interpret her aspirations as positive. And the warmth from this family comes with limits. Very, very similar to what we've just said about Denny as well. That the affection is tied with sameness, continuity. The community supports her only within the boundaries of its own norms. However, don't forget that people in the hairdressers are starting to get interested in her play. Rita's almost a bridge between this academic world, isn't she, and the culture that is at the hairdressers. And then we've got her leaving, creating an emotional and social dislocation. And look at this. I love this phrase. Rita's department from this world leaves her in a liminal space. Liminal, same root as limit. She's at the edge. Maybe we'd argue that Frank is in a liminal space as well. But someone who isn't is definitely her family and Denny. They're soundly in the middle of their space, of their culture. So anyway, Rita's on the limit. She's on the edge of her, working class culture, but she's also on the edge of the academic culture as well. She's in a liminal space, not fully part of the old world and not yet secure in her new one, on the limits of both. The cost is emotionally fragmentation. A few nice quotes here that you might want to use if you talk about Rita and her family or the community relationship. People I work with, live with, grew up with, us, we've got no culture. And I'm just going to read the summary there, or the explanation. It's one of the many lines given to Rita in which she laments the intellectual sparseness of the social class in which she was raised. Her awareness of this is what drives her to pursue an education. We've got no culture. Frank has an interesting response to that, of course, in scene 3. Anyway, in that pub scene, or that scene where she's discussing the pub in scene 6, where the mum is crying, and she says, we could sing better songs than these, than those. Sorry. I think this really is a key quote. I think this line ultimately explains what Rita's purpose is for wanting to be educated. The text is educating Rita. Why is somebody educating Rita? Because we could sing better songs than those. Okay, that's the mum saying it, but of course it's a symbol of Rita knowing that there's a better life for her. Rita tells Frank about her mother's drunken crying. She interprets as proof that many working class people want more out of life than what they have and what they get. This motivates her to continue her tutoring sessions. Okay. Relationship 4, Rita and Trish, a very interesting relationship. It starts as being, aspirational identity for Rita. She wants to be like Trish. She starts replicating her, starts copying her, starts imitating her. But ultimately, it's an illusion of perfection. It's a facade. It's not reality. Trish is this model of educated life, this polished, refined, intellectual existence that Rita admires. It's got a life of books, sophistication, cultural capital. And then Rita starts imitating her cultural behaviours. I think it's scene 2, isn't it, in Act 2, where she starts copying Trish's speech patterns, tastes, mannerisms. It reveals her desire to belong to the education class. She's on that. She's in a liminal space, but she's not a part of either class. The intellectual world ultimately is shown as fragile, and this again really is for those at the top end of the discussion or your exploration. As I've said, Trish is not merely a symbol of aspiration. She is also, a fraud. She is the illusion of perfection. Russell complicates this idea by showing the academic world as brittle, pressured, and emotionally fraught. I'm just going to move straight on because this links straight in that her breakdown undermines the idealization. Her suicide attempts demystifies the intellectual persona. I'll say it again, Trish is not given a voice in this. We don't ultimately know if she's struggling with her identity, and the academic identity is what ultimately drives her to suicide. However, the way that Russell has presented it suggests that it is. The glamour disintegrates, revealing insecurity and emotional pain beneath the surface. Her life isn't perfect. The academic world did not solve all her problems. That's one thing we can be sure of. Whatever she's got, whatever identity she has, which Rita idolized, it didn't work for Trish. It didn't solve all her problems. It didn't offer her a shield, at least. And so we've got this ultimate battle between performative identity and authentic learning. Rita realizes that adopting the outward signs of sophistication is not the same as genuine intellectual engagement. The authenticity replaces performance. And finally, Trish is a catalyst. Getting a bit of science there. Don't like too much science in literature, but anyway, Trish is a catalyst for Rita's self-defined academic path. In other words, she can see that Trish is not perfect. She can see that the academia is not the answer, and she is going to define her own path. She might, and again, we'll look at the ending very soon, but it's all about choice. So this disillusionment becomes empowering. Not the only person who's a disillusioned academic. Maybe Rita stops imitating and starts thinking independently. And I think this is really the final scene where we see it the most, of course, or maybe for the first time properly. The complete independent thinking. She's absorbed both sides of the coin, both sides of culture, and she can see the pluses and minuses in both. That's what makes us critical. That's what makes us all generally thinking strong, critical thinkers. Being able to see both sides, being able to understand, appreciate, emphasize both sides, and then we make a choice. Good life lesson there. Rita stops imitating and starts thinking independently. She chooses a version of education and a version of her life which aligns with her values. And the key quote that kind of I don't think it is the best quote for Trish, to be honest, but again, it's one that you can use just to highlight the facade of Trish's idealistic life. I came home the other day and she tried to top herself. She tried to commit suicide, and this has shaken Rita badly because she saw Trish as educated and sophisticated. Rita now finds herself questioning the true value of education, much as Frank has done throughout the play. Interesting, Do they come together at that point? They're both disillusioned with education at that stage. Oh no, I've got some American in there. Recognizes, normally I would put an S with the British, but anyway, Rita recognizes that superficial sophistication is no guarantee of real happiness. Final 2 relationships. So number 5, Rita and herself. So again, maybe an opportunity here to look at the internal relationship and how, self-formation comes about. She's got a split identity. Her real name is Susan. Okay. And so she's got this internal conflict, which is rooted between the self, rooted in the tension between the self she inherited, Susan, defined by a family, class, gender expectations, and the self she constructs, Rita. This duality is not cosmetic, it singles a deeper psychological struggle about who she wants to become. She's got another battle here, another internal battle, the desire for change versus the fear of loss. Rita longs, she desires, she wants to transform her life, yet she's unaware, she is aware that doing so will sever her connection to the past. She's shutting the door on that old life. This creates an inner resistance. She wants growth, but she fears the consequences of becoming someone unrecognizable to the people that she loves. And education as a catalyst for self-reflection. It doesn't only offer knowledge, but it forces Rita to confront how she has been shaped by her surroundings. Russell positions learning as a mirror that reflects her limitations and possibilities, and it accelerates her internal transformation. Is this the ultimate message of this play? Education can open the doorway for things, can be an opportunity for growth, can be an opportunity to access culture and understandings and languages and people, that we wouldn't meet otherwise. But ultimately, it's a mirror on ourselves. The more educated we are, the more we learn about ourselves and our own identity. She rejects inherited expectation. She refuses to accept the predetermined path, marriage, motherhood, routine, that her class background prescribes. Her rejection is not hostile, but existential. She recognizes that confronting would mean silencing her own potential. She develops autonomy and self-authorship. As the play progresses, Rita narrates her own story rather than having others narrate it for her. Her choices become self-determined. She chooses what to read, how to speak, where to live, and how to think. Education equals freedom. And then finally, Russell shows that identity is not a static entity, but something that is shaped through conscious choices. Rita's journey is the active crafting of a self, a process that is contested, ongoing, and deeply relational. Again, I don't want to go too sociological here, but identity and labels, are prescribed externally, and that's the kind of battle that we have as we have inside our own heads. Just think about the identity that all of us are trying to, as a student, as a 16, 17, 18-year-old, 19, whatever, the identity that you're trying to, become. How do you know that you've become that? Because others are telling you that you are that. And then maybe a key quote here when in the second scene of after the break, where she's starting to speak with received pronunciation. You haven't got an ugly voice. At least you didn't have. Talk properly. And I do find it interesting here that we're talking about Rita and herself. I'm kind of repeating the same point here, but we're talking about Rita and herself, her internal relationship, her internal battles. But look what the key quote is. We're talking about Frank defining her, Frank labeling her. You haven't got an ugly voice. Talk properly. I could talk for hours, which I'm sorry, I know we're nearly at an hour already, but I could talk for hours about language and identity, social linguistics. Our accent, our dialect, our language is our identity. It's so intertwined in who we are, isn't it? And if you just, and again, I'm probably speaking to students here that can change, you change your accents depending on the situation. You change your languages at times, we call it code switching. You switch the codes in sometimes 3-4 times in the same sentence. But ultimately, how you're choosing to present yourself is how you want your identity to be seen. It's how you are seen, and your language is your identity, isn't it? Anyway, so Frank is responding to Rita's silly attempt to imitate the speech of the highly educated. His criticism is sparked by a legitimate criticism of pretentiousness. She is kind of starting to become a bit of a snob at this stage. But also, I think he's got a genuine fear that Rita will change into someone other than the marvelous person, as he describes it, that she is. Okay, final relationship. We'll look at some symbols and then we'll bring it to a close. Well done if you're still with me. So, Rita and education. This is the only relationship which is a non-human, or the only transformative non-human relationship potentially. It might be that this has a that you write a paragraph about this if this is the case. I think you have to be very, very careful. I think the examiners, I think your teachers will be expecting you to talk about human relationships and external relationships. I think talking about Rita internally and this one really depends on the question. But anyway, she sees education is presented as a liberating force. Education provides Rita with the conceptual tools to understand her own life and imagine alternatives. It is emancipation through knowledge. Notice there's a very small typing mistake there. Naive is one of those weird words in English it's the only word I can think of in English that has 2 dots above the I. Historically, it's just to make sure that that there's 2 vowel sounds there. Naive. So anyway, just make sure you do that in your writing. But anyway, from naive, the studying goes from naive enthusiasm to critical thinking. She begins with the simplistic belief that education will fix her. Over time, she develops critical self-awareness and intellectual maturity. And the education ultimately is what reconfigures all the other relationships. Her learning forces renegotiation with Frank, Denny, her family, and herself. Rita becoming educated destroys her relationship as much with Frank as it does with Denny, her family, and herself. The education becomes the agent of relational transformation. Education offers her autonomy, but also creates isolation. As much as she is liberated at the end of this play, who has she got left? Who does Rita have at the end of this play? She is not close to Frank. She appreciates him. There's mutual trust. She's not close to him, apart from in an educational sense. She's grateful. She's lost Denny. Her family, have they turned around to see her, way of thinking? I'm not too sure. She doesn't ultimately like Tiger, sees him as a bit pretentious. Calls him a wanker, I think, at the end. You've got we don't hear about how the mother has reacted, but who does Rita have at the end of this? Maybe an interesting reflective point, that as much as she's absorbed, as much as she can, she's kind of left alone, maybe, at the end of this, very isolated. Gaining independence also distances her from her community and Frank and Trish ultimately, and increases her sense of solitude. Self-sufficiency has emotional costs. To what extent is it worth changing yourself? How much are you willing to lose? So anyway, Rita, education also shifts her personal voice and her worldwide views. I think her worldview, sorry. Rita develops a new lexicon, a new vocabulary and perspective. Her voice becomes more analytical, reflective and confident, evidence of deep internal change. It becomes very natural towards the end. She is an incredibly intelligent young lady young 26 or so, who absorbs so much literary studies in such a short space of time. Just imagine this yourself, from going from 0 to 100 in a year or so, however long it takes to study. And by the end, she's, caught up with everybody else who had solid educational backgrounds already, which potentially shows, deep internal change. And then I think this is a key point as well. This isn't as simple. This play isn't just some propaganda that schools are, getting you to see the importance of school, the importance of doing your homework and being on time and learning. It isn't that. If anything, it's a critique of the factory style, empty container, fill up your head with facts style of education. Education is not romanticized. Back to the British spelling now. It doesn't. It doesn't suggest that it's complete. It gives you empowerment and instability at exactly the same time. It's not seen as an ideal. It can be a destabilizing force as well. It empowers her, but it also requires the dismantling of old certainties. She can't go back to whatever she was before. And a key quote for this, what education has given her as a relationship is this: it's choice. In one of her very final lines, she says, "I might go to France. I might go to my mother's. I might even have a baby. I'm not going to Australia with you, though." But, she could. She's got so many choices. Shaken by the suicide attempt of her cultured roommate, Trish, Rita is reconsidering the worth of education she has pursued. Still, drawing on her new self-confidence, she processes the incident by asserting her independence and considering her options. She isn't, she's a strong woman. She's I know it's a bit of a cliche, but a very strong, independent woman at the end of this play. Okay, moving on. I'm just going to have a look at some 5 key symbols to help you, give some evidence for some of the ideas that you're going to say within your paragraphs. People obsess about quotes. Students obsess about learning quotes sometimes, but textual reference doesn't always mean packing your essay full of quotes. Just looking at the symbols and what they represent and linking it ultimately to the essay question and your answer thesis. That's what is really strong. So, as always, like I did in the Never Let Me Go video, I've just put a few images here to help you, jot them down. In the last video, I heard from students that were trying to draw these images on the note paper as soon as the exam started, just to give you, if you forget... This is not an exam technique video, but very quickly, some students get overwhelmed in the exam because they have so many ideas. Lots of students also get overwhelmed in the exam because their mind goes blank. They're looking, you go to your part 3, you've got a couple of lines, that's all you've got. It's not like your science where you've got pages of context and equations. It's not like your, history where you've got sources. You've got some content there to help you out with at the start. Just a couple of lines and lots of blank sheets of paper. If you can go in, start jotting down some images, start, just writing the 6 relationships that I said there on the note paper when you go in, already you've got some energy, you've got some content to get straight into this exam with once you've planned out your answer. Anyway, 5 key symbols, quite big symbols to say that this play takes place in just a single room. There's lots going on, or there's lots that can be interpreted for these symbols. So, number 1, the door, by far the most visible symbol of entry, change, blockage, barriers, a gateway to education, etc. Symbolic, physical. And just think of how she approaches that door at the start. She struggles with it. She can't get in. She can't get into Frank's academic space, physically or mentally. That stiff handle mirrors her struggle. It's almost, she brings the oil herself. She oils the handle, then goes in herself. It's almost like, look, she's almost there proving that she can self-teach herself, this new space. It mirrors her struggle to open her life and new possibilities. Every time she forces her way in, the audience sees her determination to push past the limits of clash expectation. Look at this on the flip side as well. We focus a lot on Rita, don't we? And again, I've talked about lots of relationships in here. I haven't really talked about Frank's relationships much as well, with Julia and with his ex-wife. But look at Frank. Frank is on the opposite side. He wants to be locked in. He doesn't want to fix the door. He doesn't want people to access him. He is stagnant. He is dusty. He is dreary. He is stuck where he is. It's Rita's persistent, knocking on his door, bursting in, that breaks down his barriers. He is as trapped as Rita is in this play, and ultimately at the end of the play is still pretty trapped, although he's been excluded, but he has got a fresh start. And so, that door is a big symbol, both for Frank's relationships with himself, with his students. He doesn't want his students to come in. He wants to lock that door and barge him in. Sorry, doesn't want and blockade himself in. Books, the books symbolize knowledge, authority, and the rules of the academic world. Books are escapism. Rita is trying to enter that world. At first, they're intimidating objects, gatekeepers of a culture. I think that is a great phrase. Books are gatekeepers. Frank is a gatekeeper. I will not let you pass, Gandalf. Anyway, she wants to claim a culture she wants to claim. Over time, books become tools, companions, battlegrounds. From Howard's End to Blake, they chart Rita's intellectual evolution. Yet they also show the tension between the authentic voice and learned criticism. Needless to say as well, we've also got, the burning of the books, which is important. Alcohol, focusing it on Frank's point of view, but of course we can see it through Rita, and it's kind of a language in itself, the wine labels and understanding which is the correct wine to bring to the dinner party. Frank's alcohol, I love this word, I love this metaphor here. Alcohol is Frank's shield. Just like the door, it's like a layer upon a layer, isn't it, that he has in his life. It's a coping mechanism. And it's also his eventual downfall. Being drunk, in the lecture, falling off the lectern, is ultimately what signals his downfall, his economic downfall. So as much as it protects him, it also destroys him. Maybe, if I did have time, and I've already gone over an hour here, but if we were talking about Frank's relationships, and we were talking about non-human relationships for Frank, it's Frank's relationship with alcohol, which we could talk for hours about. But anyway, it symbolizes his disillusionment, here we go again, with academia and his own wasted potential. He's so, dismayed that his poetry, that he's not got strong enough poetry, etc. That he's not got a strong enough voice. Where Rita's journey is one of opening, widening, expanding, Frank's shrinking world is held together by whiskey. The bottle behind the books shows how education and escapism collide. It anchors the darker, more melancholic thread of this play. The window. Rita goes to the window quite a few times, and again, I say this to my students, if you're trying to really do a high level answer that includes some symbolism, it's a very simple technique, but one that you just need to go through the process of, and it's come away from the play and what is that object? What is that object's purpose? What is a window? A window is a barrier it's a barrier, but it's one that still deceives you, that you can see through. It teases you, it tantalizes you, it shows you what you can have, but what you can't get to. It frames. It's within itself. It shows only what's outside of that view. Sorry for getting a bit passionate about this, but that's exactly what it represents to Rita, isn't it? It's possibility, perspective, the gap. She's looking out there at them all on the grass, studying and learning there, looking like the loving life, the students on the grass, and she's, she can't get to it. She can see it, but she can't get it, and it's where they want to be. Rita marvels, a lovely verb there, marvels, like in fact, is what marvel mean? When you kind of like in love with, infatuated by something, fond of something. She marvels at it because it frames a world she longs to step into. Long as in mean desires there, it frames a world she desires to step into. Frank barely looks into it unless in despair. Their contrasting attitudes to the same view symbolise the emotional geography of the play. Rita looking outward with hunger, Frank looking inward with fatigue. Frank doesn't look out. People are probably looking at him going, oh my God, look at that weird old professor in his office. Right. Anyway, nearly there. And then finally, the final symbol before we look at the ending is, that idea of hairdressing. Hairdressing symbolises Rita's origins, her old life, but also the performative nature of identity. Cutting hair was her way of reshaping others while feeling stuck herself. Education becomes the new tool from which she reshapes herself. I can't help thinking that this is Russell, of course. Russell has been, in his own head at some stage, deeply thinking about the connection between his new life and his old life. And he's like, that's the link. Hairdressing is as transformative to your identity as education is. And throughout the play, hairdressing reflects class expectations, the pressure to fit in, and Rita's belief in transformation. It culminates beautifully when she offers Frank a haircut. I don't want to obsess over that point, but it is ultimately what brings us to the ending now. So, 6 key symbols there: a door, the book, the alcohol, the window, the hairdressing, loads of things, or the haircutting, loads of things to think about. Okay, nearly done. But the ending. I wrote down some notes actually. I'm just going to share these with you because I think this ending is really messy, to be honest, and really complex. It's not just Rita's rejection of Frank's offer at the end. I don't even know if Frank really expects her to say yes or really wanted to ask her to go to Australia. He kind of knows that, that the relationship is never going to be something intimate emotionally. But Rita reaches this point of intellectual and personal autonomy. She's got a new voice, a new confidence. I mean, a new voice inside her, not. But, her transformation is real, but he frames it as a stage. It's not. There could easily be a sequel or a trilogy to this play. What happens after this? I asked my students, and most of them think that Rita would go off and become a teacher herself. She would be the perfect literature teacher, wouldn't she, to go back to Liverpool, getting passionate about, Macbeth, like showing, like saying, I sat there where you were and I didn't see the value of education. Now, come on, wait till you see what Lady Macbeth is going to do. Pretty much like, for me, really, I can see myself a lot in, well, not exactly, but this idea of coming from a background where literature wasn't really valued as much as practical skills, and then literature opening all doors for me. It's my entire career is based on is based on books and literature and Blake and Shakespeare. That's what's created my career. So I can see, and it's opened all the doors for me. So I can see this, that Rita would come on to be great like this. Frank, and just talking about the reason why she rejects Frank at the end. I think she would be more trapped than ever if she accepted Frank's proposal. She's cut physically. You can't be much further away from Liverpool if you're going to put yourself to take yourself to Australia with Frank, who we know seems to be starting to recognise his own weaknesses, But at the same time, he's far from perfect. He's older. He's infatuated with her, you would argue. And, Rita will be trapped with him, on the other side of the world. And that's exactly the complete opposite of why she comes in and starts, her education with him. And Frank as well, where will he be after this? I don't know. Possibly teaching in Australia, who knows? But I think he's teaching with a lot less cynicism. He's a lot more open, he's a lot more respectful, and he's a lot more kind of like softer. He's not this hard, disillusioned academic anymore, and maybe, a little bit more open to different backgrounds, etc. If I could bring this video to a close and say ultimately what this relationship is, I think it's transformative, but it's not permanent. And reflecting yourself, on things that happen throughout your life. Maybe you've already had experiences with this all, but even if you haven't, I can guarantee that you will at some stage, no doubt. You will have a relationship, be it romantic, be it personal, be it family, be it whatever, that transforms your life. Maybe every day you think about it and it improves your life, but it might not be permanent. There's no long-term future, I think, for these two characters. Okay. And that's ultimately relationships in Educating Rita. Thank you for listening all the way through. If you have done, I hope that you find this resource useful. It does take me a lot of time to do this, and I'm sorry that it's a little bit later than last year. Again, remember the PDF is underneath. Use that, and hopefully that will help you with the exam, etc., and all of your studies. Feel free to ask any questions underneath. Feel free to subscribe or suggest any other videos that you'd like to do, maybe shorter ones. I'll do another longer one next year, of course, for the exam, but if there's anything you'd like in between, please suggest. Please write in the comments, what I can do to improve, or if this video helped you. Ultimately as well, I hate saying this, but I say that I don't care, because it takes me so long, and I'm really busy at the moment. So I'm just saying, if it really has helped you, added value to your learning or your teaching, I'd really appreciate if you could do a small gesture. There's a website there where you can buy me a coffee, like €1 or €2, and you generally give me some energy. And I hate asking this, I feel really awkward, but anyway, if you want to, but generally your kindness does help me and motivate me to keep creating and sharing videos. But ultimately, it's not about me, it's about you. And I give you every I hope you have every bit of luck in the future in your exams, and please contact me if I can help in any way. And best of luck with your exams, and bye bye, see you.